Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Nathapada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje Chaitanya Chandra Charitamrita Shuddha Sindhu Vrindavaniya Surasor Misamunni Magna Jai Vai Jagan Nija Gunai Swayama Punanti Tan Vaishnavangscha Harinama Parannamami Namas Shri Krishna Shri Krishna Chandraya Nirupari Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Suruto Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhakta Maj Jai Rachilo Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Gadai Shila Tahate Na Hoilo Morachita Jeva Nahi Bhuji Keva Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Chaitanya Charit Krishna Upajibe Priti Janibera Serariti Shuni Le Porohohit Shriyatam Nityam Giyatam Mura Chintyatam Bhakta Caitanya-caritamrta. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojanavatar Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, a graceful swan in the inexhaustible reservoir of Gaura Lila, from which the very essence of Krishna Lila streams in the 10 directions, Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll absorb ourselves in discussion of Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. And we resume in the Madhya Lila, the Sanatan Shiksha, chapter 22, discussion of the Abhideya, and specifically we are in the section about a gradation in Bhagavatas. So we've heard the verses from the Bhagavatam that give evidence for an Uttam Bhagavat and a Madhyam Bhagavat. So today we'll hear the third, which describes a Kanishta Bhagavat. And as we've discussed, we're reading these verses as per the comments of Sanatana Gosvami and Jiva Gosvami, in which these are viewed as 3 strata of Prem Bhaktas, or Bhaktas that have attained Sadhya Bhakti, as per what appears to be the intent of the Payar under discussion, where a gradation in Bhaktas is outlined according to their Rati and Prema. So we'll conclude that discussion today with this discussion of the 3rd verse, and then we'll come to the following Payar in the text, which discusses Krishna's qualities and how those become manifest in Vaishnavas. So, I pick up from verse 74. In the following verse, a beginning or Kanishta Bhagavata is distinguished by means of description of certain bodily and mental characteristics they possess. And again, Jiva Gosvami specifies that these verses use particular characteristics to portray what are Bhagavatas of a particular level, but it's not that the characteristics mentioned in these verses are the only characteristics of bhaktas of those different strata. So, from the Navayogendra Sangbad, we hear Archayameva haraye pujam yashadaye hate tad bhakteshu chanyeshu sabhakta prakrita smrita. One who for Hari performs worship with Shraddha, only of the deity, and not of his bhaktas or of others, is considered a beginning bhakta. In the context of his explanation of these three verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, as being descriptive of three different levels of, quote, being devoted purely with prema, or premaikaparita, Sri Sanatana Pad comments that the mention of, quote, worship with Shraddha in this verse under discussion refers to prema. The implication being that the bhakta described in this verse has prema for Bhagavan, but lacks the superlative intensity of prema that gives rise to the vision had by advanced Bhagavatas, and the moderate intensity of prema that gives rise to the manner of friendship, grace, and disregard that intermediate Bhagavatas foster, respectively towards bhaktas, the unknowing and the inimical. Thus, the verse under discussion and the two verses cited prior to it illustrate the characteristics of those who have a relatively greater or lesser degree of prema for Bhagavan. So there isn't as much said in regard to this verse when it's read in the context of being a description of a prem bhakta. But as I said, for thoroughness, we'll also look at the more common interpretation where this is read as not a prem bhakta, but rather a bhakta who, or a bhagavata who's just beginning taking up the path of bhakti. So, for the sake of thoroughness, the alternate interpretations of this verse given by Sri Sanatana Pad and Sri Jiva Pad, wherein the bhakta described in this verse is not taken to be a bhakta of the lowest order amongst those endowed with prema, but rather as a beginner among all ranks of bhaktas, are given below. So, in Hari Bhakti Vilas, we find the following commentary. And again, I'm just reading the English for the sake of concision. If anyone wants to clarify anything in the Sanskrit, they're welcome to ask. One performs puja only for the deity. One does not perform puja of his bhaktas, and consequently not of anyone else either. One is thus beginning, that is one in whom the fundamental form is beginning, meaning one in whom bhakti is beginning just now, but will gradually become advanced. So bhakti, as is often said, is something that manifests into the chitta of a person. So when the presence of bhakti is relatively less, then you have this attitude, where there's some worship, some reverence for Bhagavan's deity form, but a lack of due reverence for his bhaktas or the presence of Bhagavan in others. Because of the occurrence of a particular fault, as per the authoritativeness of the statement in the Shastra, quote, one who has the notion of a stone in relation to a deity of Vishnu, and the notion of a caste in relation to a Vaishnava, is destined for Naraka. The fault in the Bhagavata being described in this verse, based on the indication of the disappearance of one's conception of the deity there, that is, in the Vaishnava and elsewhere, by means of the mention in the verse of Archayam, that is, by means of specific mention of such a Bhagavat offering worship only to a deity of Hari, and not to the presence of Hari within the hearts of Vaishnavas or within others, as well as because of disrespect of Vaishnavas, which ensues from neglecting to honor the presence of Bhagavan within them, the state of being a beginner is shown in this verse. So the Uttam Bhagavata was described as seeing the presence of Bhagavan everywhere in all living entities. And now, on the other end of the spectrum, the beginner is described as one who can see only the deity, the presence of Bhagavan only in the deity and nowhere else. And when one sees the presence of Bhagavan, one has the awareness of that, so to speak, or one has the conscious awareness that I'm in the presence of Bhagavan. The implication is then their behavior will be reverential, their behavior will be adoring, their behavior will be good, to put it simply. But when there's an absence of awareness of the presence of Bhagavan, then there isn't the presence of an impetus to behave well. You'd like to think someone might behave well anyway, but the idea is that without that sense of oneself being in the presence of Bhagavan, then that sense of being, of it being necessary, or there being the presence of mind to behave in an adoring manner, isn't there. So there is the susceptibility, if not the inevitability, of a lack of due respect or a lack of due regard being shown to others. So as it's explained elsewhere in, it was I think Anucheda 106 of the Sandarbhas, there's an elaborate discussion given by Jiva Gosvami about the value of seeing the presence of Bhagavan everywhere in everyone, and that the quality that Mahaprabhu, among the qualities that Mahaprabhu praises in the famous verse, Trinadapi Sunitjena Tarori Vasahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari, that among them, this quote, giving honor to others, is understood to imply the idea of honoring everyone because of the recognition of Bhagavan's presence within them. So someone who's beginning may have initially come to be aware of the existence of Bhagavan, of the worshipability of the deity, but not yet this understanding of the presence of Bhagavan pervading everything, the honorability of that presence, and therefore the imperative to be kind, to be well-behaved, to be adoring of that presence wherever one is, since it's everywhere. Okay, anyway, I think it's clear. Alternately, the word archayam is in the seventh case in the sense of a cause. In this case, the meaning is as follows. One who performs puja of Hari with Shraddha only for the sake of puja, and is also a bhakta, or worshipper of others, that is, other devatas, yet is not a bhakta of his bhaktas, that is, of Vaishnavas, is a beginning of Prakrita or Kanishta Bhagavata. This is the meaning. So, this is a far less common interpretation, which is, you might say, secondary, where this beginning bhakta, then the idea is they're performing some worship of Bhagavan, but their motivation is he's taking this word archayam in the context of cause, meaning the motivation of the person. So, when he says that one performs puja of Hari with Shraddha only for the sake of puja, and is also a bhakta or worshipper of others, the idea is that they don't have that awareness of Bhagavan being the supreme worshipable object by satisfying whom the world, everything is satisfied. Rather, Hari, Vishnu, Bhagavan, he's one among a number of devatas, and he's worshipped, so are others, and there isn't that aikantikata, or that one-pointedness upon Bhagavan, or that recognition of Bhagavan's ontological stature, if you will. So that's also another way in which someone is categorized as a beginner. In other words, they might, just by cultural tradition and circumstance, participate in worship, but they don't have the ontological understanding of what that worship is meant to be and of its purpose or its nature. So, one, or such a Bhagavata too, in time by means of engaging in puja of Bhagavan, becomes advanced. This is to be understood. In other words, someone might start out that way, but good enough that at least they do puja, good enough that they have enough regard to show worship of him, and then if they're fortunate to have sadhusanga, to get an education, to be purified, etc., then these higher things can come. Solely because of knowledge of his supremacy among the devas, or just because of attaining honor for oneself from other people, shall come about only by engaging in worship of Hari, one becomes a knower of engagement in worship of him. So this is an interesting remark. Meaning, the beginning Bhagavata described here learns and engages in worship of Hari, either only because they have just come to learn that Hari is the supreme Deva, by worshipping whom the worship of all Devas is automatically accomplished, or because they desire to receive honor for themselves in society, and they see that no one will show honor to them unless they adopt the customs of a Vaishnava and offer puja or offer worship to Bhagavan. So two very different interpretations which he offers. In other words, one might be doing it, in other words, they're just giving worship in order to get worship. It takes money to make money, be nice and people will treat you nice. Worship Bhagavan and then people will worship you. In other words, you'll be admitted or respected among the cultured folk. This is one layer of motivation that someone may have. So that would, in this way he's interpreting it, be what's referred to here and make them a beginner. Or they might be a beginner in the sense that this much they've understood, that Bhagavan is worshipable, and they're worshipping him in the form of the deity, but not elsewhere because they've yet to understand his presence there, the worshipability of that presence, etc. So in this way, Sanatan Pad gives this alternate interpretation, where it doesn't refer to a prem bhakta as in the other interpretation, but rather to a person with, a cultural exposure to the practice or some beginning level knowledge of the substance of the practice. Now we'll look at Jiva Gosvami's explanation. One performs puja only of the deity, not of his bhaktas, and consequently not of anyone else either, because of a lack of prema for Bhagavan, a lack of knowledge of the greatness of bhaktas, and a lack in oneself of the quality of a bhakta in the form of respect for everyone. One is thus beginning, that is, one in whom the fundamental form is beginning, meaning one in whom bhakti is beginning just now. This Shraddha, that is, the Shraddha mentioned in this verse, with which the beginning bhakta performs puja, furthermore, is not born of ascertainment of the meaning of Shastra, because of such a beginning bhakta's not understanding the Shastra, wherein it is stated, quote, one who has the notion of self in relation to a corpse made of the three elements, a concept of own in relation to a wife and so forth, a concept of worshipability in relation to earth, a sense of a tirtha in relation to water, but never any of these, namely a sense of self, belonging, worshipability, or source of purification, in relation to realized persons, that is, persons who have experience of Bhagavan, bhaktas, is indeed a donkey for cows, that is, severely uneducated. So this is a well-known verse in the Bhagavatam. The word gokara means a cow's donkey, which can be understood to mean that people who keep cows have to feed the cows, so they have a donkey to haul the cart to feed the cows. So the donkey is considered, so to speak, lowest of the low in the sense that they're not a human being, and among animals, their utility is only in rendering service to other more useful animals. So in other words, someone who, to call someone thus a gokara is like a put down in traditional society, which is to say, I'm sorry if this is a bad joke, and anyone can cover their ears if they don't like vulgar slang, but we do have the word in English, dumbass. And the word ass does mean donkey, so there is some carryover perhaps of this type of put down across cultures. The idea that a donkey represents something that lacks much intelligence at all. So why would the Bhagavatam use this type of harsh language? Well, the idea is that they want to convey strongly the idea that one should see Vaishnavas to be worshipable, Tirthas to be worshipable, etc., because of their connection with Bhagavan, not just because of their superficial qualities. So one need not identify with the body or have a sense of possessiveness over things. Rather, one should identify oneself as a Vaishnava. One should foster a sense of belonging amongst Vaishnavas. One should perceive worshipability in Vaishnavas. One should recognize Vaishnavas as a source of purification. So, Jiva Gosvami cites this verse to say that the person who's described here to worship only Hari and the deity and not in the Bhakta lacks this understanding. This understanding is taught in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam represents all of the Shastras, therefore this person doesn't have an understanding of the Shastra. Therefore, the puja they're performing of Bhagavan is not based on an understanding of the Shastra. This is the point that he's trying to prove. So, thus he says, this Shraddha is not born of ascertainment of the meaning of Shastra. So what's the significance of that? Therefore, that is, the Shraddha of a beginning Bhakta, is only that attained from folk tradition, or lok parampara. Means it's not based on having learned Shastra, it's not based on principles, it's based on whatever one heard from one's family members, or the people in one's village, or, in the modern day, whatever one saw on their favorite social media feed. They're just assimilating and finding some fancy amidst things that they've been casually exposed to. So thus, so they have this Shraddha which is motivating them to do puja of Bhagavan, but that Shraddha is not based on having understood Shastra, it's not Shastriya Shraddha as such. So for Jiva Gosvami, that's a very significant thing, since as he explains in his commentary on the Sindhu, that Shraddha as in the path of Uttama Bhakti means Shastrartha Vishwas, or faith in the import, faith in the meaning of the Shastra. Specifically, the Abhideya, the Artha, ultimately means the Abhideya of the Shastra, namely Bhakti. And so a person who lacks understanding lacks a conviction in this path of Bhakti, which necessitates reverence for Bhaktas, the source of Bhakti. So he says, thus, a sadhaka possessed of Shastriya Shraddha, in whom Prem has not manifest, is certainly to be known as the primary beginner, rather than the beginner described here who lacks Shastriya Shraddha. So he wants to say, what the Bhagavatam is saying as a beginner isn't even a proper beginner. It's really a beginner. It's like, half into the category of an actual beginner, as far as the way that we see the path of bhakti laid out, or the path of uttam bhakti specifically. So you might say, if you're just talking bhakti in general, then okay, they're a beginner. But if you're talking uttam bhakti, then they're not even the primary referent of someone who's a beginner of the path of uttam bhakti, because they don't have shastriya shraddha, which is said to be the basis of such path. So they're, the non-primary. So this is, in one sense, a little bit of a problem for the precision of the siddhanta drawn out. So he adjusts it in this way. In other words, to keep understanding of the importance of Shastriya Shraddha as being fundamental intact with the line of thought, and yet also accommodate this statement of the Bhagavatam as describing a beginner who's somehow still in the fold. Okay, so just for thoroughness, we also looked at these more common interpretations of this third verse of the Kanishta Bhagavat. So now we can conclude this section. In regard to this alternate line of interpretation, it should also be noted that in the previous verse, where it was said that an intermediate Bhagavata fosters prema for Ishvara, Sri Jiva's explanation that this means, quote, one one who is possessed of bhakti to him should be understood to imply that the word prema in this verse is in this case being construed to refer to bhakti in general, rather than prema specifically, that is, rather than sadhya bhakti. So in the earlier line of interpretation, where all three of these verses refer to prem bhaktas, then in the verse about the intermediate Bhagavat, where it mentions that they have prem, there's no problem, that's quite clear. But now if you want to say that this verse defining an intermediate Bhagavat doesn't refer to a prem bhakta, you have to deal with the fact that this verse says they have prem for Bhagavan. So Jiva Gosvami addresses that by saying, here, prema doesn't mean prema the way we like it to mean, or prema doesn't mean prem in the full way that we define it. Here, prema more loosely means bhakti in general. This is how he adjusts the term in order to fit the layers of categorization he wants to describe in that context. So that concludes this section. So the point is that there was a gradation in adhikar based on 3 points: Shraddha, knowledge of Shastra and hermeneutics, and 3, Chitta Shuddhi. These 3 elements determine the adhikar for bhakti as being advanced, intermediate, or beginning. And then the level of rati and prem, the level of sadhya bhakti that someone has, this determines their stature as a bhakta, or a bhagavata in the proper sense, as Rupa Gosvami defines a bhakta in the Sindhu as someone whose chitta is steeped in bhav for Bhagavan. Or in other words, one who's reached the level of bhava bhakti is a bhakta in the official sense of Rupa Goswami's terminology. So the gradation among them is laid out in these 3 verses in the Bhagavatam as per the line of thought that we've discussed. So, I hope the dual level of categorization is clear. Now let's move on. So we come to the next verse in the Bhagavatam, here in the Caritamrta, which, having explained these levels of Bhagavatas, now explains more broadly or more loosely something about Vaishnavas in general, which is the following. Sarva Maha Gunagan Vaishnava Sharire Krishna Bhakte Krishna Ragun Sakala Sanchare. All great qualities are present in the body of a Vaishnava. All of Krishna's qualities are infused in a Krishna Bhakta. So, straightforward statement, but what does, quote, all great qualities mean? All of Krishna's qualities are infused in a Krishna Bhakta. Does that mean a Bhakta becomes Krishna? If all of Krishna's qualities are there, then what difference remains between a Krishna Bhakta and Krishna? Is that what that means? How is it that all of these great qualities, and does Krishna have any gradation in qualities? These are the questions that can arise when you hear this statement. If you take it at face value, it sounds nice. Okay, Krishna's qualities come into his devotees, and therefore devotees are lovely. Okay, sweet. But if we look at it a little more precisely, then it also raises questions. So we'll look at some commentaries of the acaryas, which can help us sort out what would be the intended sense of this statement. So, the usage of the phrase, quote, great qualities, or maha gunagan, in this payar, likely harkens back to a list of great qualities, or maha gunaha, said to be possessed by Bhagavan Sri Krishna in Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 16th chapter, verses 27 to 29. These qualities are listed in the order they appear in Srimad Bhagavatam, along with explanations of them given by Sri Samipad, Sri Jivapad, and Sri Chakravarti-pad. So, we're explaining this phrase, Mahagunagan, as being specific language. In other words, there's a well-known passage in the Bhagavatam, in the 1st canto, that speaks of Krishna's Mahagunas. So by not just saying Krishna's qualities, but Krishna's Mahagunas, in this payar, we're taking it that this is a nod to, or a reference to, this well-known passage in the Bhagavatam. And we'll get to it in more detail later, but in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, when Rupa Gosvami is explaining the Vishoy Avalambana Vibhava, or Krishna, and his qualities, then he presents this well-known list of 64 qualities. And then the precedent that he gives for those qualities is from the Bhagavatam, is these very verses that we're going to discuss now. So this idea that Krishna has this long stack of qualities and he elucidates them, this is drawn ultimately from the Bhagavatam. So in other words, and he cites these verses in the Sindhu there. And we'll look further at those qualities when we get to the next chapter, chapter 23, when those verses from the Sindhu that list those 64 qualities are cited directly. So we're not going to dive into that right now. But it's relevant to the discussion, and it will come up a little bit later. But first of all, to say that all these great qualities are present in Vaishnavas, what are these qualities of Krishna? Let's relish these qualities. Let's consider what sort of supreme ocean of auspicious qualities, as Rupa Gosvami describes Krishna repeatedly in the Sindhu. What are these wonderful qualities that he has? So we'll look at a list of these, and then we'll determine more precisely how many of them are actually present in Vaishnavas, and perhaps which of them are not. So, number 1, Satya, which means truthfulness or factual speech. In other words, speaking the truth. Shocham, cleanliness or purity. Daya, kindness, meaning non-tolerance of another's suffering. Guardianship of those who have taken shelter, being a good-hearted friend to bhaktas. So, as I said, I've just to be concise here, I've rolled together in phrases the commentaries of Samipad, Jivapad, and Chakravarti-pad. In some cases, they say the exact same thing. In some cases, they differ. I've referred to it all in the footnotes for those who want to see who exactly said what. So here, kindness can be taken as not tolerating another's suffering. In other words, doing whatever one can to ensure that others are in a state of well-being. Or it can be taken as guardianship of those who seek shelter in oneself, or in other words, helping those who seek help from you. And, especially in the case of Krishna, being a good-hearted friend to bhaktas. So to be kind is to be friendly and supportive to bhaktas. Shanti, forbearance, control of the mind in the instance of anger. In other words, to be able to not get out of control when one is angered by something, or which means when some desire that one has is thwarted, and anger arises as a result of that desire not being fulfilled, then to forbear is to prevent oneself from acting out in that anger. Tyag, liberality, free-handedness with resources, generosity. So oftentimes the word tyag refers to renunciation, but here in the case of being a quality of Bhagavan, it's taken in this other sense of, to renounce or to let go of, in the sense of to give, or to be liberal, open-handed in one's dealing with resources or wealth or what have you. And that the word tyag also has that meaning, and that is the sense that's applied here in this context. Santosh, contentment, a sense of sufficiency, satisfaction within oneself. Arjavam, straightforwardness, non-crookedness, being a cause of well-being for all. So, oftentimes in the course of being a cause of well-being for one, we also become a cause of harm to another. So to act in such a way that we don't bring about harm to all in the course of trying to benefit one, at least as far as is practically possible. To bring medicine to a friend, you still have to kill some herbs or something like that to do so. So, when it says all, we can say at least, members of human society, and so forth. In other words, so to be straightforward, to not be deceitful, and to act in a way that doesn't prioritize the well-being of some harshly over the well-being of others. Shama, equanimity, steadiness of mind, being of very firm resolve. Dhamma, self-control, steadiness of the external senses. So oftentimes Shama and Dhamma are considered synonymous, so this distinction is made that one refers to being able to keep the mind steady, and the other refers to being able to keep the senses steady. Tapa, austerity, observance of swadharma, as is suitable for a lila avatar, as a kshatriya or otherwise. So often we think of austerity as, sitting on a hillside like a sage, doing meditation in the midst of, the changing climactic conditions or what have you. But here, it's saying just to fulfill one's swadharma and all that's called of one to do so, that itself is austerity. So in the case of Krishna performing a lila as a kshatriya, then his austerity is his upholding of his swadharma as a kshatriya, which no doubt was austere in that, he had to go through many battles, trials, and tribulations, and so forth to do so. Samyam, equity, the absence of the mentality of considering others enemies, friends, and so forth. Titiksha, tolerance, endurance of the offenses of others against oneself. So sometimes we can tolerate, the hot weather, or we can tolerate, inconveniences that come about from unavoidable causes, but when someone causes inconvenience to us in a way that was utterly avoidable, in other words, in a rude and unnecessary manner, then sometimes we're not as tolerant, or we don't think that there's any necessity to be tolerant in the same way. So here, what's called titiksha is the quality of enduring even and tolerating even the offenses, or even the unnecessary or easily otherwise avoidable difficulties or disrespect that others may cause us. Uparati, withdrawal, indifference towards opportunities for gain or enjoyment. So, in other words, not just avoiding it, but even if it comes to you, to still remain aloof from it. Shrutam, learning, deliberation upon Shastra. Jnanam, awareness, that is, intelligence, gratefulness, understanding of place, time, and circumstance, or recipient rather, what's called Deshkalapatra, omniscience and self-awareness, or knowledge of self. So this is a five-fold interpretation that's coming from Jiva Gosvami. So what does Gyan mean? Just to review, he says one sense of Gyan or awareness is to be intelligent. Another is Kritagyatva. So an interesting way that the concept of gratitude is described in Sanskrit is being aware of what has been done. In other words, when people have done things for you or have acted such that you've benefited, to understand how that was done, to understand and to remember, to remain aware of those acts that others have performed that have led to one's benefit. That is, quote unquote, being aware of what has been done, or what we call gratitude. So to be intelligent is one type of awareness, to be grateful is another. Deshkal patra gyatva, to know what is appropriate according to place, according to times, and according to the people that are involved in whatever circumstances one is in. That is another type of gyan. Sarva gyatva, the word gyan can also mean omniscience, full stop, and atma gyatva, or knowledge of the self, meaning the eternal self distinct from the body. Or you could take it more broadly as just self-awareness of one's own state of mind and how one's actions affect others and so forth. So this five-fold categorization comes from Jiva Gosvami. Then Virokti, non-attachment, desirelessness in regard to unwholesome objects. Aishvaryam, capability, mastery, or controllership. So the word Aishvarya, sometimes people are accustomed to this interpretation of it meaning opulence. So Aishvarya comes from the word Ishvara, which, like the word Isha, comes from the root Ish. And the root Ish has two principal meanings. One is capability, or power, and the other is possession, or control. So an Isha is one who has power, or one who is in possession. And the same goes with Ishvara. So sometimes we think of the word Ishvara to mean Lord or God, but literally it conveys one who has capability. And that's capability full stop, or capability in the free rein sense, according to Mukta Pragraha Nyaya. So it is sometimes defined as kartum akartum manyata kartum samartha, that an Ishvara is one who has the ability to do, the ability not to do, and the ability to do otherwise, or to change. This is the Ishvara. In other words, someone who has total capability. So in that sense, mastery or capability or ultimate control, this is the quality of an Ishvara. So Aishvarya, which is a specific abstract noun that refers to that quality, is thus understood as capability or mastery. And this is in this specific context. It could also be taken, and does in some cases, refer also to possession, in the sense of being the possessor of everything, which is in one sense where this idea of it referring to possessing wealth and opulence, where that connotation of the word comes in. But as per the context of its usage here, the reference is primarily to the idea of capability or mastery. Elsewhere, Jiva Gosvami also glosses it as prabhuta, or powerfulness. But there's a few different words here that refer to similar elements, so to keep the distinction there, I think that's why he doesn't bring that sense of it here. So because we also have shaurya, or valor, fortitude in the midst of conflict, teja, might, influence, power, and renown by virtue of influence, and balam, strength, dexterity, capable to accomplish difficult tasks quickly. So to say that someone is powerful, to say that someone has might, to say that someone has strength, all of these are essentially can be considered synonymous in English. And in Sanskrit as well, balam, tej, aishvarya can all be used synonymously. So the commentators have flushed out different senses that the words can convey in order to prevent redundancy in the list. Smriti, discrimination, attentiveness to the purpose enjoined and prohibited actions. So sometimes there can be a tendency to do things that are enjoined or said to be done, but without understanding why, such that one performs them even when they're not meant to be performed, or some certain things are prohibited, and then one avoids doing them even in cases when the reason that they're prohibited is irrelevant, and there's no need to not do that, or rather it ought to be done. So to have understanding and be able to discriminate both in regard to why the Shastra enjoins and prohibits certain things, and then to be attentive to the purpose of such injunctions in the course of the execution of one's activities, this is the quality that's called smriti here. Swatantriyam, independence or non-dependence on others. So Bhagavan is the one without a second, upon whom all are dependent, but he is dependent on none. Kaushalam, expertise, adeptness in action, cleverness in the form of resolving numerous problems simultaneously, and proficiency in the form of knowledgeability in the arts and entertainment. And sometimes all of the above. In other words, in the Rasa Lila, Krishna shows cleverness in resolving multiple problems simultaneously, as well as proficiency in the arts and entertainment, all in one swoop. Then Kanti, loveliness, which is taken here in a few different ways by Jiva Gosvami, as beauty, attractiveness of parts of the body, such as the hands, feet, and so on, of the complexion, taste, fragrance, touch, and sounds of the body, taste here referring to that of objects that have touched the lips or feet, and of age of the body, and of being captivating of the minds of women by virtue of all such aforementioned attractiveness. So the attractiveness can refer to the features of the body, the complexion, the coloring of the body, as well as the other way that the body is perceived through the various senses, as well as the age that the body possesses. All of these things are contributing factors in what is here called kanti, or the loveliness, attractiveness. Dharyam, composure, remaining undisturbed. Mardavam, gentleness, non-hard-heartedness, tenderness, being of heart melted by prema, and thus captivated by prema. Boldness, immense ingenuity, or eloquence. Prashraya, politeness, decorum, modesty, being appropriately respectful to all, being of pleasant speech. Shilam, character, cheerful disposition, good nature, seeking the support of sadhus, or being a worthy shelter of sadhus, or for sadhus. Saha, brightness, sharpness of mind. Ojas, vitality, sharpness of the cognitive faculties. Balam, vigor, sharpness of the conative faculties. Bhaga, excellent, and the conative faculties meaning the hands, the legs, the other things with which one performs actions, in contrast to one's sight, the ability to see, to hear, to touch, to taste. So, ojas and balam referring to those two sets of five senses respectively. Bhaga, excellence, being an object of enjoyment or cheerfulness, or being possessed of an abundance in all respects. So this Samipad gave the idea of being of cheerful disposition, referring to Shilam, whereas here it's, is it Jiva Gosvami? It's, Jiva Gosvami gives it here in reference to the quality of Balam. So it might seem redundant, but because different commentators are making the point in different places, it's not. Okay. Gambhiryam, depth, imperturbability, being of incomprehensible intentionality. Staryam, steadiness, being unwavering. Astikyam, conviction, faithfulness, having the eyes of Shastra. So astikya would literally be, is like acceptance of it being, or that it is. So that primarily, in the connotation of the word, refers to conviction in the authoritativeness or the aparushayata, the non-human origin, meaning the divine origin of Shastra. So therefore this other meaning of having the eyes of Shastra is given, which is a figurative way of saying that the person has conviction in Shastra. Kirti, renown, glory, eminence by virtue of excellence, popularity. Man, honor, respectability. And anahankriti, non-egotism, non-conceitedness, even in the midst of one's honorability. So this is a quality of Vaishnavas, in that same verse of Mahaprabhu, what is called amanitva, or this quality of a lack of man, is in some contexts by some commentators explained to mean this, anahankriti, or a lack of conceit, a lack of egotism, which in one place Sanatana Gosvami says is the fundamental quality that's the basis of all other qualities. In other words, if one doesn't have this absence of conceit, then all of one's other virtues are tainted by that conceitedness. So real having non-conceitedness is the premise of genuinely possessing all other virtues. This is a point Sanatana makes elsewhere in regard to the quality of Vaishnavas. But here, even Bhagavan is regarded as having this. So although he is literally everything and supremely great, but yet also is ornamented with this quality of not being conceited about that. Okay, so there we get from this stack of verses in the Bhagavatam, which are called Mahagunas, these 39 qualities. So there's a bit more here. I hope people like analyzing qualities, because we've got more to analyze here. And again, the purpose of this whole analysis is to ascertain which qualities are those that actually are found in bhaktas, which is the point that's being made in the pyar we're talking about. So all this analysis is to arrive at a clarity of understanding in that regard. So, in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the same verses where all these qualities are listed, Mother Earth, manifest in the form of a cow, enumerates these aforesaid qualities to Dharma in the form of a bull, and then alludes to additional qualities of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Quote, O Blessed One, in Sri Krishna, these, as well as other everlasting great qualities, worthy of being prayed for by those who desire greatness, never wane. Sri Samipad comments that the other qualities alluded to by Mother Earth are those such as being supportive of brahmanas and being worthy of taking shelter in. Sri Jivapad additionally mentions the qualities of being attended to by all metanormal powers, or siddhis, and being possessed of a figure constituted of eternal being, consciousness, and bliss. And, yes, he also states that the mention of, quote, great qualities worthy of being prayed for by those who desire greatness indicates that Bhagavan Sri Krishna is also endowed with the quality of supremacy, or varyastva, and that all the aforementioned qualities exist indestructibly in him in full, whereas in others, that is in jivas, they can exist only unsteadily and in minute proportion. That all these qualities, quote, never wane in Sri Krishna, further indicates that they are eternal and inherent in him. So here we get almost the whole conclusion, which is this idea that when it says that these qualities of Krishna manifest in bhaktas, it means a little, that according to at particular times and in a minute proportion, these qualities of Bhagavan can be imbued into them, or can be perceived and appreciated in them. But that they're entirely present in them the way they are in Bhagavan, not quite like that, and not necessarily steadily so. So in other words, there's very much a sustained eternal distinction between the Bhakta and Bhagavan, even though it says that, quote, all of Bhagavan's qualities become manifest in a Bhakta. So Sri Jivapad then goes on to list two additional qualities that exist in all manifest forms of Bhagavan, but are not attainable for jivas. So here we go, we have clear explanation from Jiva Gosvami saying there are qualities of Bhagavan that don't manifest in jivas. So although the Payar said all the qualities manifest, we have, direct statements that actually not literally all of them do. So those are as follows: Satya Sankalpatvam, being possessed of true resolve, that is, the capacity to accomplish whatsoever one wills, and Vashikrita Chintya Mayatvam, being possessed of controlled inconceivable Maya, or having inconceivable power under one's control. So jivas don't have this. In other words, jivas don't have, Maya at their disposal to do whatever they want with, and they cannot necessarily achieve whatever they want whenever they want it. In some particular manifestations or particular manifest forms of Bhagavan, that is, in certain avatars, the following additional qualities are also present. Akhanda sattva gunasya kevala svayam avalambanatvam, being himself alone the support of the quality of indivisible being. Jagat palakatvam, being the guardian of the universe. Yatha tata hatari svarga datritam, being a bestower of svarga upon enemies who are killed wheresoever. Atmarama guna karshitvam, being attractive to those whose satisfaction is in the self. Brahma Rudradi Sevitatvam, being served by Brahma, Rudra, and the other devas. Paramachintya Shaktitvam, being possessed of paramount inconceivable potency. And Anantyena Nityanutana Sundarya Adi Avirbhavatvam, being a manifestation of ever-new beauty and so forth, infinitely. Okay, well, I might go a little over time here. I'd just like to get through the rest of this stack of qualities. So these qualities up to number 48 are found in some avatars, not all. Now in the Purush avatars, who are considered the source of all the other avatars, then we get the following additional qualities. Maya Nyantritam, being the controller of Maya. Jagat Shrishtadi Kartritam, being the agent of the emanation and so forth of the universe. Gunavataratva Adi Bijatam, being the source of the Guna avatars, Lila avatars, Manvantar avatars, Yuga avatars, and Shaktivesh avatars. Ananta Brahmandashraya Roma Vivaratvam, being possessed of pores that are the shelter of innumerable universes. In manifestations possessed of the nature of Bhagavan or Bhagavatva, such as Vasudeva and Narayan, meaning the forms of Bhagavan that are not avatars that dwell in connection with the Mayak realm, but rather dwell in Vaikuntha, then the following initial quality is also present. Swarup Buddha Paramachint Akila Mahashaktitvam, being possessed of the totality of paramount inherent supreme potency. And finally, uniquely in Krishna, he who is Swayam Bhagavan, the following additional qualities are present. In other words, Narayan and Vaikuntha, other forms of Bhagavan throughout Vaikuntha, they have this totality of potency. But there are some special things that still they don't have that are only in Krishna, and those are the following. Hattari Mukti Bhakti Dayakatam, being a bestower of mukti and bhakti upon enemies who are killed, such as Putana. Swasyapi Vismapaka Rupadi Madhuryavatvam, being possessed of sweetness or madhurya in figure, and so forth, that is astonishing even to himself. In other words, Mahavishnu is said to seek darshan of Krishna, but we don't hear about Krishna in the same way hankering to have darshan of Mahavishnu. No doubt, Krishna does go to see Mahavishnu in the 10th canto, but that's for a job, not just to have darshan. And actually, he's going there because Mahavishnu abducted this other person because Mahavishnu wanted the darshan of Krishna. So Mahavishnu is amazed by Krishna's madhurya, and Krishna himself is amazed by Krishna's madhurya, but Krishna is not amazed by Vishnu's madhurya. And finally, Anindriya Chaitana Paryanta Ashesha Sukadatri Swasanidhyatvam, being one whose very presence is a bestower of all bliss upon even entities devoid of senses and consciousness. Wow. In other words, not that he has to do anything, not that he even has to play the flute, not that he even has to dance and sing or entertain in any conventional way or speak some words, but he whose very presence bestows all the bliss that anyone could ever experience elsewhere, and more bliss than anyone could experience elsewhere, upon everyone, including even inanimate entities that don't have senses and conventional means to perceive anything. So if there's anything that defies worldly norms or expectations, it's this. Okay, so with all this in mind, after enumerating all these qualities, Sri Jivapad concludes his commentary by saying that this enumeration is only a general survey and by no means comprehensive, since Brahma has intimated to Sri Krishna that Sri Krishna's qualities are infinite. So now if we go around saying Krishna has 56 qualities, that's it, then that's not the idea. This is a stack of 56 to give you an indication of the tip of the iceberg, that there's innumerable qualities. This is one way of categorizing some that are prominent among them. But remember, quote, even among the highly adept by whom all the particles of dust on the earth, all the snowflakes in the sky, and all the particles of light emitted by the celestial bodies in the heavens are somehow in time able to be counted. Even if you could count all of that, who shall be able to count the qualities of even you, who are possessed of qualities by your very nature, and have descended for the benefit of this world? In other words, someone could count all the things throughout the whole of the world, but still they'll never count all of your qualities. In light of this explanation, it should be understood in regard to the statements in the payar under discussion, quote, all great qualities are present in the body of a Vaishnava, and, quote, all of Krishna's qualities are infused in a Krishna Bhakta, that the mention of, quote, all, sarva or sakala, is not meant to be taken literally, but rather to refer to all the qualities of Krishna that can appear in a jiva at least to some extent. Alternately, the mention of, quote, all can be taken to refer to all of the qualities listed in the 3 verses of the Bhagavatam we discussed earlier, since all of the qualities mentioned in these verses specifically are said by Sri Jivapad to be attainable by jivas in minute proportion. So that's why, at least in my reading, this choice of words, Mahadguna, is specific, and it's a direct allusion to that passage in the Bhagavatam where that stack of qualities is given, because, as per Jiva Goswami's analysis, all of those Mahagunas do actually, or are actually potentially manifest in a Vaishnava. So in that sense, the word all stands, if you will, if you take it to this, quote, Mahagunas to be the exact set that are called Mahagunas in that section of the Bhagavatam. Later in his teachings to Sri Sanatana Pad, Sriman Mahaprabhu also offers a survey of Sri Krishna's qualities. He enumerates 64 qualities and explains that 50 can be observed in a jiva, the purport being that this occurs only when a jiva is specially graced by Sri Krishna. The import of the present payar, therefore, is that all applicable qualities of Krishna become instilled in a Krishna Bhakta by Krishna's grace when Krishna so gracious a Bhakta in this way, in reciprocation with the Bhakta's bhakti. A variant reading of the second half of this payar states this more directly: Krishna Bhaktye Krishnara Gun Sakala Sanchari, that all of Krishna's qualities are infused in the body of a Vaishnava by virtue of Krishna Bhakti. And that point that's made in the variant, and which is implied in the reading of the Mool that we're taking, are both confirmed by the citation from the Bhagavatam that's cited next. So we'll get to that in the next class. Pardon me for going a few minutes over time, but I thought it would be more convenient to just conclude this long stack of discussion of all these qualities in one shot. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has any comments, questions, or corrections, please feel free to share. All right, well, I hope then things are clear for today. So in our next reading, we'll get to further discussion of Vaishnava's qualities, or qualities that are specific to Vaishnavas, not just Krishna's qualities appearing in them, but another long stack of qualities, which we'll also look at in detail, that are said to be characteristic of Vaishnavas. So all of these things can deepen our appreciation for the presence of all of these qualities in the Vaishnavas who we're blessed to associate with and to recognize the presence of Krishna by virtue of those qualities within everyone, whereby our own attitude of adoration for Bhagavan and his presence in Vaishnavas and adoration for those Vaishnavas can be nourished, since as it is said by Jiva Gosvami in one place, that the only problem we face on this path of bhakti is aparad, and all varieties of aparad are based on a lack of adar, or when we have a lack of a sense of adoration for whom we're dealing with, then there is the scope for aparad. So all such discussion of qualities can support us in fostering that sense of adoration. Oh, now I see a hand. Does someone want to comment something? Okay, it says Brajananda. Is there any comment there or not? Okay, I'm seeing a video, but I'm not hearing an audio. I think, Brajananda, you're muted. Okay.
Oh, yes.
There we go.
I found it. Okay?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, I found it finally. Yes, if one is devoid of any quality, how, even if he's trying his best in the bhakti path, how can he recognize any good quality and in others?
It'll be tough. I mean, literally, if someone had no qualities, then they wouldn't have the quality to recognize qualities. I don't know if you mean it in that literal and extreme sense. Okay, you're muted again. Yep, if you can hear me, I'm just letting you know you're muted, so we're not hearing you.
Yes, now I can. I have to, again, to touch the button every time. So it was about my personal case. If I don't feel I have any quality that you have talking about, but it's not in my ability to recognize those qualities in higher bhaktas. So how can I do for that?
Well, one perspective we can take is that the association of a Mahatma can impress us. In other words, by associating with someone who has qualities, then we'll perceive them, we'll, be benefited by them, we'll experience them. Sometimes, in life we might, experience someone showing kindness in a way that we've never seen someone show. Conventional movies and advertisements depict instances where someone goes out of their way to do something nice for someone, and then that makes such an impression on them that they suddenly realize this quality of kindness that they themselves didn't have, or that they themselves had never experienced. So if we associate with people who have many wonderful qualities, then those qualities can also reveal themselves to us, or they can also impress us, such that, just in ordinary life, people go out to dinner. they go to have dinner at a restaurant, they have a waitress or a waiter or whatever. Sometimes the hostess or the waiter, the waitress, whoever, was really nice. They were just exceptionally nice. And then people think, oh, let me give a nice tip. The quality just impresses them. They weren't necessarily looking for it, but they could appreciate it just by how it was expressed. So that's something we can experience in ordinary life. In the company of Vaishnavas, we may be impressed by the qualities of Vaishnavas. They show themselves to us, and this fosters our appreciation for them. No doubt there can be subtle qualities that take time and greater sophistication on our own part, greater culturedness on our own part to appreciate. But the process is simply association and education with as much respect and good behavior as we're able to sustain.
So does that mean that
Okay, you're muted again.
and now?
Yeah. Okay, you're still muted.
And now?
Yep, sounds good now.
Okay. So does that mean that finally the jiva, even if it's not conscious of his own quality, it may be intrinsically possessing those qualities in order to develop them further?
No, I don't think. I mean, we're not talking here about anything about the intrinsic constitution of the jiva. We're just talking about qualities perceived by the psyche in the context of embodied life.
Okay, Babaji, thank you. Radhe
Radhesham. All right, well then, if that's it, we'll conclude here. And if we're so blessed, we'll continue next week with further discussion of Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Shri Radhe.